the Before I Die New Mexico 2018 Symposium. I'm Gail Rubin, the Doyenne of Death, and your event coordinator for this festival. This is our funeral director panel discussion, and this was my favorite event from last year because we had such good conversations. I do want to give a shout out before we start to the sponsors that make this event possible, which includes A Good Goodbye, funeral planning for those who don't plan to die, eternitygardens.com, National Guardian Life Insurance Company, the Estate Pros Company, French Funerals and Cremations, Morris Hall Estate Planning Attorneys, Legacy Concierge, Passages International, and Zia Trust. And a big thank you to Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of New Mexico for giving us this great setting to have this symposium all day long. So, welcome to our funeral directors. We have Gloria Salazar with Salazar Funeral Homes and Crematory. Yay, applause. Apollo Miller with French Funerals and Cremations. Yay, he's my YouTube star. He did a great tour of the funeral home, and it is my top hit of YouTube videos that I have put out there. And Jody Herrington with Daniel's Family Funeral Services. Yay. So let's start by just introducing yourself, how you got involved with the industry, and anything you'd like to say about your funeral homes. Starting with Gloria.
Thank you, Gail. Well, I'm Gloria Salazar. I'm a funeral director, but I'm also the owner of 2 funeral homes and a crematory here in Albuquerque, which allows me the privilege of helping bereaved families plan unique life celebrations for their loved ones. And our care and compassion goes back 4 generations. My husband is a 4th generation funeral director. Our care and compassion also is a result of 100 years of doing business here in Albuquerque. And I kind of fell into it by marrying into the family because I'm actually an engineer by background. And so when I got my MBA not too long ago, I decided to kind of stretch my business wings and start a funeral home, and here I am.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay. My name is Apollo Miller with French Funerals and Cremations. I'm the managing director for the Lomas and Eubank location. My background is in scientific research, biology, and chemistry, and found my way to this business out of Atlanta, Georgia. Here at French, we have several locations, 5 rooftops and a cemetery. And as I said, I oversee the operations at the Lomas and Eubank location. So I have a great team of individuals there, and just like the rest of our colleagues here, we're all in this to celebrate lives uniquely. And so we're glad to be here today to represent our firm.
And hello, my name is Jody Harrington. I'm the general manager of Strongthorn Mortuary, Fairview Cemetery, and Affordable Cremation and Burial here in Albuquerque. I don't have quite a science background as Apollo here. My background is English literature, humanities, and the arts with a specialty in the Renaissance. I have a BA from Virginia Tech with that, and you know, there's just not a lot of jobs in that field, so I have a mortuary science degree from Cypress College in California. Our mortuary, I'm so proud and humbled to be the general manager of Strongthorn. It is the oldest mortuary in New Mexico. The business was established in 1882, shortly after the Strong family lost 1 more oxen and just couldn't go any further on their trail to wherever they were going to, and they established their business on copper. So we're no longer on copper, we're on coal, but we do have a long distinguished history in Albuquerque, and I'm just so very pleased to be able to be a part of that tradition.
So Gloria, what's the question that funeral directors always get asked?
so I'm sure my colleagues will agree, but I have a little diagram because one of the things that people always ask me, and I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but people often ask me, how much is cremation? So I'm going to give you a little diagram because I find that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So in Albuquerque, we've got pretty much two options. We've got burial in Albuquerque, burial versus cremation. But with burial, we always have a body and a casket. Well, with cremation, we not only have a body and a container, but we've also got a cremation authorization. We've got an OMI permit, which is $210. We then have to cremate the body and then put it in a smaller container. Which one looks like it should cost less? Right? But in Albuquerque, and you guys might follow up with what I'm saying, in Albuquerque, burial is anywhere from, basic burial is anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000. Cremation, guess what? It's $2,000 to $3,000 also. So all of you are going to say, wait a second, how come you've seen the advertisement that says $8.95? And how come there's this other price for $29.95? Right? How many of you have seen that? Yeah, so burial's $29.95 and $8.95. How can that be when there's all these other things that are going on with cremation? So here's the real answer. There's 3 full-service funeral homes here in Albuquerque, and there's 3 low-cost providers in Albuquerque. So in general, even around New Mexico, burial's going to cost you anywhere, basic burial, from $2,000 to $3,000 with just a body in a casket, nothing else. And cremation is also going to cost you $2,000 to $3,000. But it's the low-cost providers that have driven the market in Albuquerque to basically advertise it this way. But the reality is this $29.95 is not a body and a casket. This $8.95 is a body, a casket, a permit, cremation, and an urn. But with this one, we have a tendency to embalm, so we might have some fluid. We might do a person's hair. We might go ahead and dress them. That's a terrible drawing, sorry. We might organize a church visitation or in our chapel. We might go ahead and do a church service. We might even do an evening service. We've got all this planning that we've got to do. And somewhere along the line, we got to take out a car or 2 or 3 and take it to the church. This is the $29.95. This is not anywhere near what I showed you before. And so it's only because of the market in Albuquerque that you're seeing this kind of comparison from $29.95 to $8.95. And so these full-service funeral homes right here, Salazar, French, and Daniels, do have low-cost options that provide competition with this. So, but they're not marketed under the Salazar name, the French name, or the Daniels name. And so we have been able to effectively be able to compete against the low-cost providers to be able to come close to this. But believe me, this $8.95 is nothing like what you're getting for the $29.95. So when you get into the funeral home and you think you're paying $29.95, trust me, you're not ending out paying $29.95. But that's a whole marketing thing as opposed to an actual provision thing. So anyway, that was my first question. Isn't that usually what everybody asks the first time? How much does cremation cost? What is your burial cost? What is the initial cost for all these things?
And it's worth noting that there's no cemetery cost listed here.
Right.
You know, the cost of the burial plot or the cremation niche or whatever. Would either of you like to also weigh in on this topic?
I think I'll speak a bit first. Coming from the southeast, what I can say based on market share analysis is you see the cremation rate rise as you go from east to west. Being where we are now, all of our businesses have been affected by this rise in cremation. So what does that do to the funeral home? That causes us to become competitive. As Gloria said, it makes us be creative and figure out how we can combat inflation, wages, and then the wave of cremation increasing. So I will tell you all, I do believe earnestly that from this point forward, cremation will continue to increase. And it's very much important for the funeral homes to understand that and be on the front end of that. So that's why you do see a lot more advertising than maybe you did a couple years ago or a few years ago. There's many traditional families that will still choose burial or the $29.95 option. However, as we see our clients detach from the funeral home and want to do more what we call DIY funerals, we have to become creative to keep with that too.
I'm a skeptic from birth. I think I am a skeptic. I tend to think that when a funeral home, a low-cost funeral home, decides to go into the business and drive down the pricing, they are in a way saying that we're just gonna do this as quickly as possible because the service doesn't matter. The only way they can really reach that low cost is because they're stripping away at services. The French, Salazar, and Daniels firms, we don't strip away. Yes, we all have our low-cost competition aspects, but that's because it's the name of the game, and business requires that you be competitive in as many markets as possible. But I got into this business because I believe wholeheartedly in the importance of ritual, the importance of taking time and spending time with loved ones who have passed away and acknowledging the life that they lived. As simple as that life may have been, as elaborate as that life may have been, it's still important to take ritual into consideration and acknowledge the death and not just say, you know, that's not important. These low-cost leaders are not offering the service of ritual and of memorialization in the same way that a full-service funeral home can. So I'm skeptical about the true benefit to the family of low cost. If you're just in and out, you're not acknowledging the life and you're not acknowledging the death. So that's my 2 cents in my soapbox.
Okay. Do we have questions right off the bat? I know I've got some questions I want to ask. Back here? Yes.
I was really confused after all this diagrams on the chart. I was left with a confusion.
She's confused about what?
The cost.
The cost?
What cost was going to where, and what your options were. I was left in a confused state.
Why don't we talk a bit about like the service fee of funeral homes and then the other parts that get built into what becomes a fee?
Well, you know, that's interesting that you say that, and it's nice to hear that you guys are all talking about these things before you die, because, you know, it is a confusing thing. If you look at all our GPLs, general price lists, as we call it in our industry, I mean, ours is only a 2-page front and back, but let's just go down the line. How many pages is French's?
Ours is 17 pages.
Ours is a total of 11, but ours also includes the casket and the outer burial container.
Correct. So the reason why it's 17, 11, and 4 pages if you consider all the other stuff is it is that confusing. And so that's why we really encourage families to come in and individually. We talked about celebrating a life uniquely. We cannot possibly give you a quote, and we get this call all the time. How much is a cremation? What if I want to be buried? And you can imagine how confused you are, how confused we are when we get the question, because now we have to go down the path of, well, do you want a viewing or not? Do you want a service in our chapel or not? Do you want to go here? And I just want this. Well, see, when you've got that many choices, 17 pages, 11 pages, how could you possibly make a decision? And all of us do that with packaging. We try to come up, like for us at Salazar's, we've got 5 burial packages and 4 cremation packages. So when we sit with a family, we listen to their story and try to decide based on what they're telling us, what package best fits their needs. And that makes it more cost effective. And then once we get into that area of where we think it's more or less where you want to be, then we build an individual package for you. So it is, I can imagine that for those people who aren't familiar with our pricing structure, who aren't familiar with the choices, and with cremation, it's really opened up a huge realm of choices because you can have services today, tomorrow, 5 months from now, a year from now, and that really changed all the options we have. You can have a body present, not have a body present, not have embalming, have a casket, take the casket to the retort and actually burn it with the body, wait a while, maybe 2 weeks, a month, have a graveside service. There's a ton of choices, so I can understand why you are confused about it. And I think that's really why I tried to draw this diagram, is to show you that when you see $8.95 versus $29.95, it's not that simple. It's not at all simple. And the best thing you could do is come and talk to us. We will allow you to come in and sit with us as long as you want for free. That's not on our price list, but I'm telling you, we all will talk to you free. Come in, sit down with us, decide what kind of a plan you want for you, your loved one, or just sit and talk with us, make an appointment. And you can go over all those details with no financial obligation.
Yes, I concur. What Gloria said is correct. We actually prefer for you to come and ask those questions, to come and bring those concerns to us so that we can sit down and speak about it the way that we should. Now, Gail brought up the term, the professional or basic fee for funeral homes. What I want to do is distinguish what that means to the industry, what that may mean to you as the consumer. To the funeral homes, when you see or you hear the term a basic fee, it's basically a professional fee for the fact of you choosing our funeral home and having us proportionately break down overhead, having some sort of sheltering of the decedent's remains included, for the administrative duties of securing a signature for the death certificate or for the cremation permit. All those different items together come to be what we call the professional fee or the basic services of the director fee. Every funeral home has that. However, every funeral home's fee can and most likely is different. So what Salazar has is maybe different than French versus Daniels. But every funeral home is going to have that. And so we wanted to make sure you all do understand that a portion of those numbers is this proportionate breakdown of overhead costs. And when you have a low-cost provider or a provider that provides limited services, you have reduced overhead, thus the number can be lower. So I just wanted to distinguish between those for you all.
Good points. Excellent. Another question? My question is, please tell me, and let's start with Jody, about the most creative, meaningful, memorable send-off you've been involved with. I'm sure you each have stories.
Yeah. When people ask me that, I typically don't include this one, but I think I will because it is something that we can do for people, even though in this instance it was not for a person. In Santa Fe, my last funeral home, I was at a funeral home in Santa Fe. We did a second line jazz funeral through the plaza of Santa Fe. We got the police involved, the city involved, we had a horse-drawn carriage, big band playing songs that you normally hear in a second line funeral in the heart of New Orleans. It was actually for, though, an art piece by a famous artist, Chris Roberts Antio. She did 2 parts of an art piece about James Brown's legs. And if you have not heard the story of James Brown's legs, it's bizarre and wonderful and disturbing, and I suggest you look it up. But one of the 2 pieces was sold to an art collector in Los Angeles, an anonymous buyer. So before that half of the entirety was sent off to Los Angeles, Chris Roberts Antio wanted to have a funeral, a way of saying goodbye to her beloved art piece. So we put together a second line funeral for her with all the bells and whistles, and it was wonderful.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that sounds fun. Yeah, that sounds fun. I think what I would like to speak to you all about is a time wherein, prior to coming here, in the Southeast, the funeral is a very, very big deal and a part of the end-of-life process. But there was a family, and this family in particular was very close to nature, very much outdoorsmen, all of the children, all of the parents. They just loved nature, so much so that they lived kind of remote off the grid. And so when they came to our firm, which was right in the middle of downtown Atlanta, we were a little, confused as to how to serve them appropriately and do something unique. But what the family's request was, they wanted their loved one to not be dressed in any clothing, which we know is not something we do very often. But they wanted to figure out how could we get their loved one to be seen by the general public, but be as close to nature as possible. And so what we did with this particular case is we had over 1,000 flower petals that we covered the entire inside of the casket with. The decedent's face was able to be seen in the hands, but everything else appeared as a bed of rose petals. There was no clothing there. And that was one of those times where we've never really done that again. But what it did for the family was set a precedence that anything can be done if you think outside of the box. And so that would probably be the most out of the box and different one that we've ever done.
That's great. That's great. Got a story to share?
I actually have a story, but it's not quite as lovely as all those other ones, and it wasn't for the public to see. But I say it because it was one of the most unusual ones, because we really wanted to honor one of the women that were found on the West Mesa. The family came to us and they wanted to bury her in a casket. And so, as you guys know, by the time they found those women, they were really just bones. And so, but the medical investigators did a phenomenal job at identifying them through those bones. We got them in about 10 different bags that were very delicately labeled so that they could use that to identify the women. And so these families, as you can imagine, wanted something to be able to see. And, as you guys have seen, we're very creative. That, you come from a creative background, and it's kind of nice as a funeral director to really think outside that box and really think how you're going to do it. So we went ahead and had the family sign all the appropriate paperwork for viewing a body that was going to be in that particular state. And we went ahead and set the bones carefully in the casket, lined them up according to their anatomy as accurately as we could. Took so much time and detail to lay it out. And then we got a really sheer nightgown so that we could place it on the body. So it gave some dignity as best we could to that body and made it look as best as possible. And I got to tell you, it was a private viewing, so it wasn't for anybody public or anything like that. But because it was mainly for the parents, and they're the ones that got to go in and see it, she was so pleased because she recognized her daughter's hand. She could see by the bone structure that it was her daughter. And let me tell you, sometimes seeing is believing, and there's nothing that was going to convince her that her daughter was dead until she saw something. And so we had a job to do to really present in the best light possible what kind of image she was going to have. And I don't think that she went away with that lasting image of these bones behind a sheer nightgown. I think in her mind, you know, it was the pictures, because we did a very wonderful video tribute, and the life that was lived before all of that is what she remembered. But it did really provide that aspect that a lot of people need in a viewing, which is believing that that person really is gone. You know, we're funeral directors, so we're going to say it from the very beginning to the very end, a death has occurred. And that's part of the whole aspect of the funeral, is at the end we want to be able to say a death has occurred, and you've got to realize that because a death has occurred, now there's a new life without that person.
Excellent stories. Other questions? Yes, sir.
As a veteran and a member of the Patriot Guard, I stand flag lines up at the National Cemetery. And so one day it dawned on me to go into the office and say, how do I arrange this ahead of time? And they said, you can't. It's got to be through a funeral director. And so the whole thing sort of fell flat right there. And I was wondering if there was any more you could share with me about what's going on with that?
Yeah, so the veterans and the national cemeteries.
Are you talking about arranging for having the Patriot Guard present, or arranging for the funeral itself for you? To arrange your own funeral is incredibly easy. You choose a funeral home that you like and trust, and you ask to arrange your funeral. We always recommend that you set up a pre-need. There is a difference between just coming in and talking to us and actually setting up a pre-need. Pre-need means you're funding it as well, but we recommend funding it because it saves you money in the long run, very much money, and oftentimes. When it comes to the aspect of arranging for the military and the honor guard, all of that, yes, that does come more at the time. But we certainly take notes of your preferences. If the family would like to have the motorcycle escort by the American Legion or the Patriot Riders or whichever veterans group of choice that they are particular to, we'll take that note and we'll make sure that when the time does come, we contact the appropriate people. The veterans organizations, particularly the one that you're involved in, with, they're very generous with their time. They don't ask for money, and I'm just saying this for everyone else's edification. There's no fee. It's a very honorable and dignified way of sending your loved one to the veteran cemetery or the cemetery of choice, and it's a way for their comrades to pay tribute as well. So we definitely make sure, if you want these veterans benefits, including the peripheral ones like the American Legion, Patriot Riders, we'll certainly arrange for that. Unfortunately, that's a call at the time. Everything else, though, cemetery, actually arranging with the funeral home, that's something that can certainly be done in advance.
I concur, and thank you for your service. That is appreciated. This is a concern that has come to us many, many times. And the truth of the matter is exactly what she said. There are certain benefits, like the actual interment, the setting of the date and time and location when you want to have the interment at the National Cemetery, that just can't be done ahead of time. However, as she said, the funeral portion can be completed to such a degree that we know you wish to go to the National Cemetery on, say, a Tuesday if available, say between the hours of 12 and 2 if that's available. It can get as detailed as we can get it, but there are some things that just based on federal regulation has not changed yet, and that's unfortunate, but it is true. I will also let you all know there's many veterans here in Albuquerque, of course, and sometimes we have some that wish to go to, say, Arlington National Cemetery. Our funeral home always likes to let our families understand that the National Scheduling Department that schedules for just about every national cemetery in the country does not schedule for Arlington National. Arlington National Cemetery schedules for themselves. They're so large that they have to have their own scheduling processes. So that was really the only thing I wanted to interject regarding, those portions. Arlington National Cemetery is separate.
And
It's also very time sensitive. I think the waiting period is, I want to say almost a year, right?
Yeah, ours is 6 to 8 months. We just had one.
Yeah, 6 to 8 months. I also want to thank you for your service and say that it's not such a big deal on a second interment. But so, for instance, if you had a spouse that died first, then everything is pretty much set in terms of your location. So if you ever see some of those burial sites that have the upright markers in the older section, if you see them disturbed, that's because somebody there got buried a long time ago, first interment, and so the second interment is obviously right there in that same location. Whenever you have two veterans, that's another situation that's a little bit different. They will go ahead and reserve the second spot right away. So if you're both veterans, so let's say a husband and a wife are both in the military, you can choose to be buried side by side. That's the only case. And that's only because you each get a plot, because you each have that benefit. Most of the time it's double down or triple down or however many they need to do for all the dependents that also get that benefit, like underage or handicapped dependents. So it's the first interment that is really critical. Second interment, it's easy. Even if your wife was not the veteran, if your wife was buried first, she now is going to reserve the spot. And part of the reason why is because at the Santa Fe National, I think it's like this everywhere else, they do it very methodically, as you could imagine. It's the government. And so they line them up according to how many they have that day. So if you're the first one for that day, you're the first spot, second spot, and on and on and on. So that's one of the reasons why you can't reserve their spot. They do it so that they can dig all the graves all at once, cover all the graves at the end of the day, and then the next day they move on to the next one. So that's why I say in the only cases if you and your wife are a veteran, can you have that slot reserved, and they will save it and move on to the next one. Did you have something to add?
I'm just going to add a little bit about Arlington. With most veteran cemeteries, you can pre-register. So if you're not planning on going to Arlington National, I would recommend pre-registering. That's just getting some of your paperwork in. And if you go onto the va.gov website, there is a link on, and it gives you instructions for getting your paperwork in a little in advance, and just making sure you have all your ducks in a row before the time comes, and so we're not waiting for the eligibility office to get back to us. Another thing that I would recommend for anyone who does want to take advantage of the beautiful grounds of Arlington, you do also have the opportunity to use one of the chapels on Fort Myers, which abuts the cemetery. There are two chapels. One is the Old Post, which is a very beautiful old building, and then they have a newer building, newer as in the 70s it was built, so it's very 70s on the inside, but it's bigger, offers more space. Most people don't know that that is a free opportunity for you. Arlington provides the chaplain, priest, deacon, or rabbi, and they will do a service in that chapel of choice for you. So I always recommend if you're going there, you might as well go all the way. Take it all. It's a very nice benefit that Arlington offers, and I wish more people would take advantage of that cemetery, but I understand you like to be close to your family.
And make sure you've gotten your paperwork, your DD-214 form that indicates your service, that gives you that right. And I think something else I'd like to mention about services in a national cemetery is they're really short. I just had the opportunity to be the celebrant at my uncle's funeral at a national cemetery in Florida. They said, you've got a total of 20 minutes, and half of that is going to be taps and flag folding. And so I didn't have much time to talk. And they'll hold it in a pavilion and not at graveside, probably because of that opening them all up and putting them all in. Yeah. Other questions? We're on a roll. This is great. No? Okay. Well, my question is, what would you say most people get wrong about the funeral industry in conversation?
That we're in it for the money.
Oh, right.
Most people think that funeral homes are just about making money. And I guarantee you, I don't live a frivolous life. I live a very modest life. This is not the career for the person who wants to make money. We truly do this job because we love it. We don't do it because we're going to become millionaires. Even owners of funeral homes or general managers or managers, they're not living high on the hog. It's truly a passion that we have. We've managed to find something that we fit, and finding a job that you fit is hard for anybody. But when you find a job that you fit and you can do it because you love what you do, it's such a privilege, and that's why we do what we do. We love what we do, and we love being there for the families that we serve. I don't know why we love it. We're crazy, I think, but we do.
It's like Caitlin Doty said, why did death choose me? Why?
Do we need to make an appointment with you to come to talk to you, any of you, about pre-planning? And can we just come and get information and then leave and come back and then decide?
Well, I'll speak for French. French is what we call segmented, meaning there is a department at French just for pre-planning. It's called the Advanced Planning Department. Any French location or cemetery that you go into can provide you information for pre-planning. The way that it works with us is essentially, let's say you walk into Lomas and Eubank on tomorrow and you just want information. We will provide you brochures, contact information, and some generic information that our directors can pass along to you. And then either we will have someone meet with you at your location selected or at one of our locations. Our team is at appointments everywhere across the state of New Mexico, in homes, coffee shops, churches, wherever you all are convenient. Our team is willing to go. So that's a great question.
I always recommend an appointment just to make sure that someone is there to help you when you come in. We have funerals going on. We have other appointments. So we want to make sure that our time is yours. We're not distracted by something. So we always recommend an appointment. But if you walk in, we will give you the information so that you can peruse it and then come back for a in-depth appointment, and yes, to actually do a pre-planning session with one of our pre-need specialists. That does require an appointment because it's a good chunk of time.
Do you want to add anything on that? Okay. Make an appointment. It's a good idea. What new trends are you seeing? I've heard about interest in green burial and home funerals. Are you seeing that?
Well, we certainly hear that, but what the interesting part is that I don't know how many of you shop at organic grocery stores. I do it all the time, but that's because that's what I prefer. It's not less expensive. So if you're looking for that alternative in terms of being really different, we hear about these pods that people want to be, and you hear about I want to be a tree. That's all nice until you kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what is required for some of it. And luckily, we have La Puerta, and I'm sure you guys heard from the people at La Puerta, and we have a great partnership with them for a very low-cost burial. But even that, you know, people talk about, is everything going green? Is green burial the new wave? It's always been there. And Gail will tell you the very first thing is the Jewish people have been doing green burial for, you know,
Thousands
centuries.
of years.
Yeah. So, yeah, none of this is really new. So it's not really a new trend. I think to Apollo's point, cremation is on the rise, no doubt about it. So some of our colleagues that are down in El Paso or in some of the other southern states have the opposite effect. We've got in the state of New Mexico about a 65% cremation rate. They've got the opposite. They've got 65% burial. And so that's really the only trend we're seeing is the rise in cremation. And we've talked a little bit about all the reasons for that, but that's really kind of the major trend, right? And so with that, obviously, and I said it earlier, is that with cremation, we can just do so many things because we can have the body present in a Catholic rosary, we can have the body present for the Mass, and then we have a third day where we cremate the body and then go to the committal service with just a smaller container. So it opens up the possibilities for all kinds of things, but not really anything new that I don't. Do you guys have anything new?
When you mentioned doing the viewing and the rosary and all that, do you tell people about rental caskets? Do you do a rental casket?
Of course we do. Of course, yes. But we don't call it a rental. We call it a ceremonial casket. But we in particular have lots of options. I mean, we have tons of options. So that's just one among many for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, and the same for French. We do ceremonial options or rentals. I will bring up one thing that I don't know if many of you have heard or spoken about, and that's recimation, or what we call flameless cremation or alkaline hydrolysis. They're all different terms for the same process. Now, this is something that has not hit here yet. But I will tell you, having done some research and been to trainings about international studies, this is something that is coming towards the West from even some of the Eastern countries. For example, Korea, they have federally ran crematories where there's 18 to 20 different machines in a large, facility, and the government mandates how cremation is done and how many happens. But recimation is something that a lot of funeral homes have a question mark somewhat over their head about because, we don't know about costs, we don't know about trends, we don't know about environmental impact. However, at the same time, there's been some studies and things like that being spoken about. So I think over the next few years, you all will hear that term, alkaline hydrolysis or flameless cremation, come about at some point. So we just wanted to plant that seed. You can, of course, Google it. Most people are right now. There is some information out there about it.
Well, I don't know if these are actually going to become trends, but I have heard about a developing body composting way of laying a person to rest. That is going through a large grant study program at the University of Washington. The young woman who is leading that, she has been given multiple grants because she's on to something. She really is. And then we have, coming from our own state, New Mexico, a young man in Santa Fe has developed a further process for cremation called purified remains. And he was given a grant by the Los Alamos National Labs to develop his process, where cremated remains are put through another heating process mixed with a very, very, very small portion of glass, and the purifying process gets rid of the gray. So everything that's in cremated remains, that's ash, that's things other than the person. His process gets rid of everything that is not the person, and you're left with a smaller mass, and it's pure white. And that is the true essence of the person, with no ash, no carbon particles, none of the stuff that makes cremated remains gray. His business is actually up and running now. It's begun. So those are two processes that I hope get a little more action. I know purified remains will be something that does take off in some areas. So.
And there's also in Europe, I think Sweden, this woman who created a process that I call freeze drying. It's chilling the body to sub-zero temperatures, makes it very brittle, then you shake it and it breaks up into a dust, basically, and then screen out any foreign particles, and it becomes nutrient dense, as opposed to cremated remains, which are inert, just the calcium carbonate. So I don't know that that's going to be coming to America anytime soon, but that's something else to be aware of out there. And then, of course, there are all those creative things you can do with cremated remains these days. You can be turned into a diamond. You can have a painting made with the cremated remains. You can be shot into space. Tattoos. Oh, yeah. Other questions? Not at this point? Okay, I'm going to keep asking. One of the things that I'm always talking about is, I try to bring a light touch to the dark subject of death. And the only way you can laugh in the face of death is when it seems like a distant possibility. When somebody is sick in the hospital, if somebody's already died, you can't joke. Joke time is over. And planning ahead and shopping around without the pressure of having someone sick or dying is a fascinating shopping trip. And I'm sure all of our panelists will assure you that it's okay to come and look around. It's not going to kill you. Are there any pieces of advice you'd like to offer to our audience today that would go beyond whatever I'm out there saying?
I give a few talks about green burial options and our cremation options and different ways of caring for oneself after death. And whenever I go to give talks, I always take with me the Federal Trade Commission guides everything we do. We're heavily regulated, and they have a booklet, basically, that you can get for free from the Federal Trade Commission's website, and I bring their paperwork with me because I want people to do the research, but do the right research. Going on the internet and just kind of floating around in the interwebs, you don't know what you're going to get. But if you go to the actual agency that regulates what you're looking for, you'll get the correct information. So I bring with me the booklets that they provide so that people can see, okay, when I go to a funeral home, I should be asking this, or this is what they should be providing me with. We're never going to get mad if you come in with a booklet and say to us, okay, the FTC says that I should be asking this. Great, you've started the process and you're starting to learn the right information. We do get concerned when you come in and say, my Uncle Harry read on the internet on some blog by Ted the beekeeper that you should be doing this. And we're like, Ted the beekeeper probably wasn't accurate in what he was telling you. So get the information, but get it from the right place. So
I've heard you say about your association with green burials. So in a non-embalmed remain, we have to deal with it quickly. How do you, in a brick and mortar environment, what would that look like, stepwise?
It's called refrigeration.
Right, but I mean, okay, so I'm a motorcyclist. They find me in the ditch.
Right.
Next.
Can you guys hear what he's saying? He's saying that we basically, with green burial, have to deal with it quickly because the body is organic and it's decomposing, basically. The first thing we do is we, if we are picking you up at a home or anywhere, the first thing we do is ask for embalming, and if you choose not to be embalmed, the very next thing we do is put you in a controlled temperature environment so that you're basically, by law, that's our state law, we're required to do that, and that's what we do. Years ago in Albuquerque, hardly any of the funeral homes had refrigeration because we embalmed 100% of the time. That's how we preserved the body initially. So that was more common back then. But we, for green burials, it's very simple. And the law, though it says that we can have the body out of refrigeration for 30 minutes, it specifies that's only for identification purposes. So let's say we go to La Puerta, because La Puerta is about a 40-minute drive, I'd say. By the time we get the body out, and possibly for, like, let's say a Jewish funeral, we might want to do the tahara. So we've got to now spend at least 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes cleansing the body, going through that ritual, and then we've got 40 minutes. But the law in the state of New Mexico says that if we're on our way to final disposition, it's okay to be out of refrigeration. So that's what, I mean, and it's effective. I mean, you know, in the case where someone is, let's say, badly decomposed or something like that, we still don't necessarily embalm those bodies either. And so we will keep them in refrigeration and then quickly do whatever we need to, either take it to a cemetery in a casket, place it in the ground, even if it's, you know, unembalmed. It's not a problem. We do that all the time.
I rode my bike, December 2nd, I drove my bike. I had a health scare that was real serious last fall, a year ago. And I went shopping. And I rode down to La Puerta and checked it out. I like it, okay? But between the time they find me, I've been run over and left for dead twice. You're looking at a miracle. So I figure the third time it's probably gonna catch. And so I got
Or you might have 9 lives.
I got a 3x5 card in my wallet behind my driver's license that says, when you find me in the ditch, this is who you call. And I was just wondering, I like their presentation, but a question came up, okay, between the wreck and Highway 47, what happens?
Well, that's what's called an unattended death. An attended death would be somebody in hospice, so any attended death comes under the jurisdiction of the Office of the Medical Investigators. And that's another thing that is really important when you're pre-planning, is that many people come in and they say, well, I'm not going to do a viewing because I'm obviously going to be surrounded by my loved ones. And I have to tell you, you know, nobody plans to go to the Office of Medical Investigators, but, you know, that's always a possibility. And, you know, we hope you're not, but that's kind of what their job is to take jurisdiction over any unattended death. So yeah, in that particular case, they'd be the first one, or the second one's on the scene. The police would be the first ones. They'd secure the site because their responsibility for, the police are responsible for the site. The medical investigators are responsible for the body. And the two of them together work on the cause of death and the circumstances surrounding it. So the first thing they do is bring you here to Albuquerque, because the medical investigator is here in Albuquerque. So even in other places around the state, this is the morgue for the Office of the Medical Investigators. They have satellite places, and some of the funeral homes operate as satellite facilities, but ultimately all the autopsies take place here. So that's where, you know, I can't say what percentage. Do you guys have an idea of what percentage of our bodies? I can't tell you off the bat, but, you know, A lot of our
get
bodies
a
do
lot.
come from the medical investigators because they're unattended deaths. You know, it's all the unexpected deaths, for sure.
I would just pick up from what she was saying. So yes, your remains would be taken to the office of the medical investigator, upon which somebody in the family would be urged to select a funeral home. Once the funeral home is selected, there is a form or a document that the family has to complete that allows the remains to be released to the funeral home. At that point, then, of course, the family is in meeting with the director in person or by phone so that we can then plan out the services and things of that sort. So if you have a pre-planned arrangement, that really saves time in that final arrangement process, because now it's more verifying than it is planning for first time. So.
And I can vouch that planning ahead, you can put your plans on file, pull together all that information. It saves hours of work, because I did that for my father-in-law, and when I discovered how much information I needed that I didn't have, I was really glad he was still alive to provide that information. And over dinner one night, he was like, oh yeah, I'll get you my veterans papers and the family history and my social security number, and I'm gonna write my own obituary. And guess what? When the time came, we had all the information, and he hadn't written his own obituary, and that's what took the most time. But we were still done in an hour. And they hadn't prepaid, but my mother-in-law put it all on her credit card. Think of the points, the miles. And she even said to me at the time, you know, I really didn't like it when you were pre-planning, but now when we needed it, I'm glad it was done. And I am glad we are done. This was a wonderful panel. Let's have a round of applause for our funeral directors here today. Feel free to ask them questions, and thank you so much for coming and participating in the Before I Die New Mexico Symposium. Be safe out there.